Good afternoon to everybody. So earlier today, I attended in person the most recent leave to appeal application put forward by Lucy Letby. This took place at the Royal Courts of Justice in London, and before we go any further, Lucy Letby has been refused leave to appeal. This is in regard to the most recent trial, the retrial in the case of Child K, where Lucy Letby was found guilty of attempted murder. So earlier today, the defence put forward one ground of appeal, which really, revolved around the media coverage. The media coverage since her conviction from her original trial, and did that affect the jury? Were the jury prejudiced in the most recent retrial? They put forward that the trial shouldn't have gone ahead. The judge shouldn't have allowed the trial to go ahead because Lucy Letby couldn't have received a fair trial. Now, the defence put forward some 64, different issues, and that revolved around media coverage, radio interviews, some of the experts giving interviews, some of the police who are involved in Operation Hummingbird giving interviews, and mainly the newspaper coverage after her initial conviction. The prosecution argued that really, in this situation, what you have is called the fade factor. So you have a massive amount of media coverage shortly after conviction. I think they said there was something like 40 articles or pieces the day after her initial conviction. The day after that, there was something like 10. And then the day after that, there was 4, and it wasn't on the TV. So the prosecution were basically saying, of course you're going to get media coverage. Of course you're going to get people reporting on what's taken place. That's completely natural. But the jury, when it comes to the retrial, they're not going to remember the salacious details or the headlines, nurse death or nurse, evil nurse does X, Y, and Z. The jury are simply going to remember, yes, this is Lucy Letby, she's been convicted of X, Y, and Z, and that's how I know of her. I don't know the salacious details, I don't remember the salacious headlines that were put out in the press very shortly after her initial conviction. Now, the defence obviously completely argued the opposite way. They said that the jury would have been prejudiced, the jury would have remembered these salacious details, and how could poor old Lucy have a fair trial when all of these individuals had put out such misleading headlines and topics regarding her house, regarding her friends, regarding who this individual was outside of the hospital setting. But quite rightly, the prosecution also picked up on the fact that during these 64 issues or 60 odd issues highlighted by the defence, and again we're talking about media pieces here, many of those media pieces selected by the defence actually focused on the hospital management. It wasn't about Lucy Letby, nurse of death, it was about the hospital failings and the management and how that hospital was run. Now, what was quite utterly bizarre was that in these 64 issues highlighted by the defence, and again we're talking about media coverage here, radio interviews, newspaper articles, and everything else in between. What was included in those 60 odd issues by the defence was the New Yorker article. The most pro-Letby biased piece of shite journalism that has been released in the last 10 years. And yet Nicholas Johnson stood up and said, why has this been included? Why have you got the New Yorker article in here when this is actually a pro-Letby piece, a piece which actually gained quite a lot of traction online. It was spread around on Twitter, this, that and the other. And the argument just went nowhere. I mean, the argument for me ended because really the judge in the retrial said quite clearly to the jury, you can take into account Lucy Letby's previous convictions. So why does the media coverage matter? If the jury are allowed to know about Lucy Letby's previous convictions, they're allowed to take them into account, why does the media coverage matter? To me, it was going nowhere. It was going absolutely nowhere from the moment that it started. And as I say, we only had one ground of appeal. We had no door swipe data. I expected the old door swipe data to be chucked in there as an additional ground. Nope, nothing of the sort. Now, I'm sure some people will ask, well, was Lucy Letby actually there? Did she attend in person? The answer is yes, she attended via video link from prison. How did she appear? She appeared very much like she did during the last appeal, to be perfectly honest. She was very calm, very stoic, sort of tuned in during moments, tuned out during others, sort of looking around the room, looking down at her clothes, looking at the floor, listening at some points intently, others just sort of, going with the flow. But there was no reaction at all when the judgment was passed, when the leave to appeal was refused. She wasn't shocked, she wasn't angry, she wasn't sad. She was just, it was almost like, I don't know if that's the right word, but just another day in the office. She just seems very composed. And it was kind of like that, as I say, with the last appeal, when I actually attended the 3-day hearing, which took place earlier this year. Again, it was the same situation, sort of listening intently during some parts, looking around the room during others, and looking at her clothes, looking down at her top, looking down at the floor. But no reaction, no visible reaction, no shock, no anger, no outrage, no upset. The person who was conducting proceedings did say, once they closed down the live links and everything, they did say that Lucy was to stay there because her barrister, Benjamin Myers, was going to have a post-trial conference with her. So I'm guessing she was going to stay online and then speak to her barrister after the proceedings ended. But I actually attended remotely today, so I didn't have to actually travel all the way to London to attend in person. So I was watching and viewing remotely. I was granted access by the Royal Courts of Justice in London, which was similar to the last appeal hearing, the 3-day hearing that we had, as I say, earlier this year. Now, with the retrial, I guess, yes, I did expect a few more grounds of appeal rather than just the one focusing solely on the media coverage and whether Lucy Letby could be guaranteed a fair trial. I was expecting the old door swipe data to be chucked in there. And there was also an issue during the retrial regarding an unrelated case, a quote-unquote unrelated case that Nicholas Johnson was talking about. And I think the judge actually told the jury at the time to not take what Nicholas Johnson had said into evidence. He shouldn't have said that. He shouldn't have brought in this unrelated matter. I think it was like to do with a dislodged tube, possibly, with another patient, and he was told off quite ferociously at the time by Benjamin Myers, Casey. You know, you can't be bringing this in. It's unrelated to the case. I expected something like that to be brought in as a grounds of appeal, but absolutely not. It was just solely focused on the media coverage. And as I say, the prosecution on one hand said, well, of course you're going to get coverage. It's a massive monumental case. And half or a good selection of these issues that you're raising here actually talked about the management of the hospital. It wasn't about Lucy Letby and her devil horns. It was about the mismanagement of the hospital, how the hospital was run, and even including the New Yorker article, which even, as Nicholas Johnson said during proceedings, gained quite a lot of traction online. It's a pro-Letby piece, and you've even included this in, the case of, could Lucy have had a fair trial? I mean, yeah, it just seemed a little bit strange to include that as part of the issue. I think there was about 20, was it 20? 20, I believe. 20 different articles or issues out of this 60 had a lot of discussion about the hospital and the management. Whereas the defence were putting across this view, well, it's Lucy Letby, angel of death, and Lucy Letby, did this, that, and the other. It's painting a picture in the jurors' minds. But as the prosecution said, the media coverage of this case faded considerably over time. 40 articles in day 1, 10 day 2, 4 in day 3, and then it wasn't even in the news. It wasn't even on the TV. I mean, now, when you look in mainstream media, and even up to the trial, before that trial took place, the retrial of Child K, you had the releasing of that New Yorker article, which, as I say, is a very pro-Letby piece. So, yeah, a little bit strange to include that within those issues. Anyway, as I say, later today, I'm expecting a full transcript to come out, which will be put on one of the government websites, which will have the judge's remarks in full regarding this refusal. But just to clarify, Lucy Letby has failed in her most recent bid to appeal. As always, if you enjoyed this video or you found it informative, please do like the video before you leave. And as always, many thanks for joining me for this particular video. I look forward to seeing you all again for the next one. Take care. Cheers.